Our guest today is a fascinating woman. She's one of 3 female master engravers in the US today. One of her most recent projects was a set of dueling pistols for the recently released John Wick 4 movie. She does amazing work on firearms, knives, and other things, and you'll get to hear all about how she does it today on Manufacturing Talks.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
DYS Media, your digital media relations agency. Public relations, website design, digital marketing. You get found by the customers and talent who need your solutions. You get media placements in top publications, the best job candidates coming to your website, a digital presence that gets you found by the right people. Call 616-298-8798 to get started today.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vinosky, your host, and thanks to our sponsor, DYS Media. I'm pleased to be joined today by Melissa McMinn. She is Master Engraver at her own studios, Melissa M Studios. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks, Jim. Happy to be here.
I'm glad you're here too. You got some really cool stuff going on. I'm going to start it off by pointing out that your work was just featured on some dueling pistols in the John Wick 4 movie, correct?
Yes, true. That was very exciting.
I bet that was. We'll talk about that in more detail down the road here. But first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a master engraver. I primarily work on steel, whether that's knives, firearms, some other things. I've done bicycle parts and jewelry, a lot of different things. My background was completely different than this. I was in the biotechnology field before becoming a full-time artist, but life has taken me the path of the self-employed artist, and here I am.
Very cool. So, you just told me something I didn't know, and that is the bicycle parts thing. So I'm a huge bicyclist. Yeah.
There you
we'll
go.
Definitely we'll have to talk about that a little more.
Anything metal, you got to customize it.
Yeah. And we'll have some overlay of your work here as we talk, so people get a chance to see what you do. It's really amazing stuff. Right. And so you mentioned the whole biology, biochemistry world. I saw that on your profile, and I saw that you also sold Harleys. So yes. A couple very different things in your background there, and then you wind up as an engraver. So why don't you walk us through that path and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, my life's kind of bobbed and weaved. So I went to college for the sciences and then moved to Southern California. I was actually really into pinstriping. You can probably see a couple paintings behind me of pinstripes, but I worked on hot rods and motorcycles, worked for Harley Davidson for a while, and then ended up shifting from that into the real job, I say in air quotes, with getting into the corporate world with my biochem degree and working in sales and consulting within that field, and always did the artwork on the side. I was into still the painting, got into leather work for a little bit, did carving and tooling on leather work, had the grand vision of doing a saddle one day. And then that kind of shifted me towards engraving. I'd always been around firearms and got the carving into leather dialed in. I was like, oh, well, carving in steel might be kind of fun. And I have these firearms around, so let's try that. So, and when I started learning that, it really stuck. It was like the medium that really spoke to me out of all the different artistic mediums I've tried. And I was fortunate enough to meet John Barraclough, who is a FIGA master engraver that lived within the LA area. And so he kind of became my direct mentor, and I get to see him a couple times a week, sometimes a couple times a month. But he got me honed in, kind of helped that self-study come to the next notch. There's walls you hit during self-study with something like engraving that you really need a mentor to guide you in and teach you some ins and outs or pro tips, and then keep studying, putting in the time yourself. Yep. And then I also took a lot of classes from GRS Tools in Emporia, Kansas, who also manufactures engraving tools. And they offer courses with several US-based master engravers as well.
So I'm guessing that a lot of my audience, like me, they can kind of envision the very basics about what it is you do. But tell us more about the process. And you've mentioned, in fact, I introduced you as Master Engraver. What does that mean? And how does all this come together to deliver
Sure.
that amazing work that you do?
So, master engraver process in the US, it's not like in Europe where you go through an apprenticeship, journeyman, master. It's a peer-reviewed process within the FIGA Guild, which is Firearms Engravers Guild of America. So there's, I believe, 12 different things you have to accomplish when you're being peer-reviewed by the other masters. Some of it's gold inlay, some of it's scroll work, cutting, lettering, just different principles within engraving that a professional engraver will end up having to execute well in their career. And you're judged and graded, and I believe you have to have a 90 or above to pass that course. And fingers crossed for me, I put in a lot of time creating my pieces when I submitted them and was sweating bullets, but luckily I passed the first time around, because it is
Very
quite
nice.
a demanding process.
Yep.
And
Well,
actually, this piece behind me was one of my master's projects.
oh, excellent. Well, and so, you mentioned how big a deal it is in general, but then too, you are one of 3 women in the US who hold that master engraver rank, right?
Yeah,
And the youngest of the
I
3?
believe so. Yeah. Really cool. One of the first female master engraver, I believe, and I might be mixing this up. There's Rachel Wells and Diane Scalise. Rachel actually also helped form the guild, which is pretty
Oh, wow.
special.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty cool to be among the ranks of those 2 ladies.
Yeah, and everyone else, not to take it
Yes,
away from anyone, but
absolutely.
obviously, like manufacturing, historically, it's been male dominated, and always good to see that reach broadening.
Absolutely.
And so we talked up front about the dueling pistols on the movie. So, you've established yourself, you're doing engraving, focused on firearms. How is it then that this opportunity in the movie making world came about?
Yeah, that was so much fun. So I guess it was during pre-production. I don't know a ton about the movie industry, but they were looking at what piece to use for that scene and ended up contacting me to design the artwork and also execute the engraving, which with the movie industry, it's funny. It's like, hey, we need it yesterday and it needs to be great, and we might need it in duplicate. So the way my world works, I'm usually booked out at least a year in advance, but I'm such a fan of the franchise. I was like, okay, here we go. Buckle down. It's going to be 80-hour work weeks for the next 6 months, and let's get it done.
Yep.
But that was really cool to be asked to do something for a film that I've also been a really big fan of, so I couldn't say no.
Well, and it I think brings attention to an area where obviously firearms enthusiasts are very familiar with what you do, but the broader public, probably not, right?
Yeah, the chance to bring hand engraving to a wider audience was really special.
Excellent. And so we mentioned up front, you have your own studio now, Melissa M Studio. So how did that happen, and how's that going for you?
It's going really well. I'm on year 6 now of doing this completely full time. I've got a backlog of about 16 months, so I'm kind of picking and choosing which projects to book after that. So I've been really fortunate to have a good clientele that appreciates and knows the process of hand engraving, which I know you asked that. I'll get into what that process is, but it's very time consuming, and it's quite expensive because of the time and the sometimes materials involved if there's special precious metal inlays or things like that, different finishes and techniques. So I'm really fortunate to have found the clientele that allows me to keep practicing this art and to do it at the levels that we're doing it at.
Mm-hmm. And you said you're focused on firearms. There's also knives. What other kinds of engraving work do you do?
I do a little bit of jewelry work here and there. I'm also getting into intaglio printing, which is fine art prints that are actually printed from a engraved copper plate. So I'll have a few more of those releasing this year of the latest ones I did was the John Wick dueling pistols, so it actually looks like a dueling pistol. The next ones are actually going to be the artwork that was applied to the pistols, so a little bit less gun centric and a little more focused on the artwork itself.
Yep. So this is a little different topic than what I usually take on, because usually I'm talking to manufacturers, and this really just caught my eye because I'm a big fan of artists as well. But you kind of reside in between manufacturers, right? You mentioned the company that makes the tools you use. So obviously there's got to be some very specialized tools that go into metal engraving.
Very much. This one behind me here is one of my favorites. It's a ball vise that rotates and articulates so I can spin and get the scroll work done. Obviously, the microscope's a helpful tool for not only vision, but for ergonomics, to sit upright and not be bent over 10 hours a day at the bench. And then there's the hand pieces that actually do the carving. So I do use hammer and chisel once in a while, but the pneumatic tools that GRS and Steve Lindsay makes have made a hand engraver's job a lot more efficient and ergonomic. So most people use those quite a bit.
Is there much automation? And I guess tied to that, is there a risk of automation coming and stealing your work away?
I think there's always going to be a niche for solely hand engraved work. If you've ever handled a hand engraved piece versus a laser engraved piece, the comment that was just made to me last week by a client that saw this gun, the Levy Breaks gun, was that there's no soul in a laser engraved piece like there is a hand engraved piece. And the right photos can capture part of that, but until you see this kind of work in person, it's a little difficult to understand just viewing it on the internet. So I think that collector's base that has seen it, appreciates it, and knows what goes into it will always exist. The laser engraving, I think, also has an awesome place in our world, that we can start customizing things in a fairly quick and effective manner that everyone can have something kind of special fairly easily.
Yep. Now, you mentioned bicycling, which is what I do with a lot of my spare time. But it also goes for firearms. And that is, I'm thinking, I'm putting on my mechanical engineer hat here. That's what my degree is in. Okay. You're removing metal as part of the engraving, and you're working on things where obviously the strength of the metal is important. How do you balance that kind of structural issue with the art that you're doing on the piece itself?
It's actually shocking. Deep relief engraving, you can go about a 0.5 millimeter down and get this beautiful contrast that when you stipple it appears black to the eye. It doesn't reflect light. So you're not actually removing a ton of metal when you're engraving. There's certain engraving, like sculpted engraving, where you are moving a lot, moving it around, but it's really not changing anything structurally. There is specialty stuff like gun engravers. There's, we like to think that we're more specialized than everybody else when we know where the firearms parts are, and what's hidden behind certain things. But you can get into some shallow stuff there every once in a while that you kind of just have to keep an eye on. But usually the manufacturers work with us pretty well with schematics and kind of tell us where those spots are if there is anything to look out for.
And then, so with those manufacturers, how do you get tied in with them? How do they find out about you? How do they identify what pieces of theirs might be more valuable with that engraving work?
Yeah, so it's gone both ways. I've reached out to manufacturers, they've reached out directly to me, and then I've also had clients that wanted my work specifically, but they wanted a certain gun, so we had to connect with the manufacturer and see if they were willing to do it. It becomes a little difficult with firearms because a lot of them are made overseas, a lot of the higher end ones. So there's a few manufacturers here in the States like Kohler, Griffith, and Howe that do manufacture in the US. So there's no import or export issues, which makes people like me's life a lot simpler.
Yeah. What about, have you ever thought of doing your own like add-on pieces for, let's say, the AR-15 line, where you're attaching all these different pieces, having engraved?
I've thought about it. I've been so busy with kind of the higher end sporting arms and fine knives. I haven't ventured into the tactical world a lot.
Yep.
I'm a big fan of the 1911 platform.
Me
So
too.
I've got a couple yeah, I love them. Just love them
Yep.
so much. My favorite gun to shoot. But I've got a couple gunsmiths that are really well known. I just did a gun with Ted Yost last year that came out beautiful, and it's pretty well known in my portfolio. But I like working on stuff like that rather than I call them Gucci guns, the tactical kind of
Yeah.
ARs that are all tricked out. They just haven't spoken to me yet.
Understand. Yep. You mentioned individuals who seek you out. Have you done just work aftermarket on individuals?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
that's probably the majority of my business.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or maybe 60-40 there, manufacturers versus individuals, but it just takes a little bit of education, like anything, educating the client about, if it's a Cerakoted Taurus, it's probably not a
Mhm.
candidate for, $10,000 worth of hand engraving.
Yep.
So the high-end 1911s, on the other hand, perfect candidates, stainless or strip the bluing. It's all a process. So you being focused on manufacturing, I work with a lot of different people, like the finishers.
Mhm.
If I strip the bluing, it's got to go back to somebody like Turnbull Restoration to get
Yep.
either reblued, color cased, or whatever the finish is, and then back to me for anything else that needs detailed. So it definitely is a logistical kind of problem with this sort of thing, or not problem, but there's logistics and other manufacturers and collaborators involved to create something that is embellished like this.
Yeah, that's interesting for people who aren't aware of the firearms world. Bluing is a coating on the steel that's anti-corrosive, and so yeah, if you're engraving, you're breaking through that coating, and
Absolutely.
if you just leave it the way it is, it'll rust. So
Yes.
yeah, back it goes
Yeah.
to the
Yes.
finishers. Makes sense.
Yep.
And then when it comes to the different manufacturers you work with, are there further opportunities where you can make more ties with other manufacturers, or is your plate full right now? Where do you stand business wise?
I'm always open to collaborations with companies that are interested in really taking something to the next level.
Mhm.
My mind, unless someone boxes it in, I go straight for the moon as far as, oh, well, let's do this and that. And so if people want to do something super high end and you've never seen it before, and you want to test the limits of different finishes and selective finishes of that nature, I love that sort of thing. So I'm always open to stuff like that.
And then the art itself, where do you get the ideas? Is that stuff that comes from your customer, or is it something that you come up with? Is it a mix? How does that
It's a
work?
mix of both. Yeah. I did a gun last year for a gentleman. It had all six North American quails on it, but it was done in a very Art Nouveau way, in kind of a stacked dime with Art Nouveau gold inlaid frames. That one was just totally out of my head. And they just kind of let me loose on it. And the one I'm doing now is actually an idea of the clients that it's landscapes that they're fond of. So that one was influenced by what they wanted and then kind of reinterpreted by my artistic style.
Yep. Yeah. And so then the other thing, obviously, engraving is removing metal to make that artistic pattern, but you also
Yes.
mentioned inlays. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so inlays, everything's mechanical. I'm not welding anything. It's all a mechanical hold. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a channel like for a wire inlay. The channel under the metal looks something like that, a channel cut, dovetailed, and then the gold's actually hammered into it. Being that steel's so much harder than gold, the gold just goes right in. You polish it flush, and then you've got your inlay. So I like to specialize in multicolor inlays. A lot of engravers don't like doing them. They're a pain. You get the harder inlays of gold. I'm a glutton for punishment. I'll inlay the tough stuff, but I just like the way it looks when the product's finished. Something really colorful and different that if you're looking at a gun rack full of 20 guns, you're probably going to see that this one's a little bit different, even if you're
Right.
not familiar with engraving.
Yeah. And then you mentioned knives is another big area for you. So like what
Yeah.
part of your business would that be?
It's a little bit smaller lately. I've taken a few in this year. I've got a Randall knife coming up in the next month, and then a Osborne knife for a client. So some of them are the high-end art knives that probably, reside most of their life in a case. They're just absolutely stunning, beautiful, the finishes and the craftsmanship behind those. So it's really special to be able to work on those pieces too.
Right.
A lot of knife makers forge their own steel and, do the whole manufacturing process themselves, so to speak. And then I just come in and embellish, or bedazzle, as I say sometimes.
Yep. Now, I'm not part of that business. I've talked to a few knife makers as part of my work, but that, from an outsider looking in, seems like it's a pretty fast growing area.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of people here based in the States getting into it, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
It's cool to see those coming up and people, taking kind of small business craftsmanship to the next level.
Yeah, definitely. So then beyond those pieces, what are some other, I guess, different things that you would focus on as opportunities for your work?
Well, like I say, the printmaking is something I'm really getting into heavy. It's really an honor to be able to create these heirlooms that are really special to the clients. It's also limited to that client when I put so much time and energy into one piece. So the printmaking is a little bit more production. So I can do that in studio myself with my own two hands, but it can get the artwork and the art of engraving out to a lot more people than just the one person that owns the gun. So I'm focusing on that moving forward and keeping kind of the same business with firearms, knives, jewelry, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And other just random things that come in, which I've done restorations on old clocks for ships. Different types of museum restorations, coats of armor, different things like that historically have significance and need a skilled professional to work on them. So I've done quite a bit of that as well.
Are there any wild cards out there, things you've thought about that would be really cool to engrave on that you haven't gotten a chance to do yet?
I've thought about spear guns.
Yeah.
I've seen some engraved fishing rods, but I haven't seen a spear gun yet. And living in Florida, I'm like, that would be pretty cool to see something really, really highly embellished like that.
Now, it's funny you mentioned the bicycle thing because I just saw an engraved crankset yesterday or the day before.
Oh, neat.
Hadn't seen that in years. It used to be a big thing, probably like 20, 30 years ago, you'd see it. And it kind of went away. Have you had much opportunity to?
I've done quite a few cranksets. I did quite a few of those early on when I started. I wasn't set up to do firearms then, so I was doing a lot more non-firearms items. Haven't done any in a while. I just had another gentleman that does fine hardware for boxes. So the presentation box that Steve Parker made for the John Wick guns, the gentleman that produces the hardware for those is interested in getting some engraved, kind of in the old style, the old Victorian style that you used to see more of, and now it's kind of gone by the wayside. So bringing back some of those old school embellished items will be a fun process in the future.
Interesting. So how's business?
Very good. Yeah. I was just talking to another engraver about the business side of things. So we have to wear a lot of hats being self-employed artists. So a lot of us want to hide in our caves and do our engraving and do our art, but we got to get out there sometimes and network and display our wares, and social media and that whole thing, that's become the way of the world for the small business owner. So a lot of hats to wear there. And as long as you kind of maintain a balance of you're still producing your work and doing your work and also running the business side of it and getting it out there to people, I think there's a lot of opportunity for artists in this field.
Excellent. What do you do for fun?
I shoot guns.
Should have known that.
I shoot a lot of skeet and sporting clays, and I also ride horses a lot. So yeah, those are kind of my outlets. A little bit of snorkeling here and there being in Florida, fishing.
Excellent. Yep. So what haven't we talked about that folks ought to know about, whether it's your business at Melissa M Studios or engraving in general?
I didn't go into a lot of the process yet of engraving and cutting the steel, so I can kind of walk through a little bit of that. Get some visual aids going on here.
Perfect.
So this is a shotgun that I'm working on. So that is this is silver inlay up here, and then this is the landscape. So that will end up becoming a landscape, and the gold in it is actually variegated gold. So I used 8 different carats of gold to create a sunset gradient
Oh,
and
wow.
some clouds. So once it's finished and detailed, it'll have a lot of depth to it and really look like a sunset. But to do that, you have to carve away all the metal that the gold's in and create little Velcro stickers, little burrs, and then hammer the gold in, flush it down solid, make sure you don't have any burrs sticking up through it. So it's really all about cutting away the metal and making it look good.
I like that analogy, the Velcro.
Yeah, it resonates with people, right? You've
Yep.
all seen that. Different tools. These are the engravers, they're called. Different cuts and angles create different lines and different effects as far as visually. If you want a really shiny beveled cut, something that's going to glisten and sparkle at you, there's different geometries you can cut your tool at before you start cutting the steel. So the processes are pretty in depth, and there's a lot of really interesting, cool things that you can do to create different effects in the metal based on how the light's going to reflect off of it.
Amazing stuff.
Thanks.
Okay, so folks, where do they find you if they're interested in your work?
You can find me at melissamstudios.com or Melissa M Studio on Instagram, Melissa M Studios on Facebook. If you Google Melissa McMinn Engraver, it'll all eventually come up, but those are the best places to find me.
Perfect. Well, Melissa, thanks so much. This has been an education. And,
Thanks so much, Jim.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff that you do. Keep up
Happy
the
to
great
share
work.
it with everyone. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and thanks to all of you for tuning into Manufacturing Talks, joining us every Tuesday for new episodes. Thanks again.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.